Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this refresher course on new paradigms of business and management. Uh, I'm sure all of you are enjoying a terrific series, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to spend about an hour with all of you, sharing some of my own learnings in different areas around management. And you'll find that just given my background, I'm more predominantly focused on areas of risk management. So just to sort of put some structure to today's discussion, uh, you would find that there are four sections in which I'm trying to split this up, this whole session. Uh, and it's not going to be exactly the same amount of duration, but I'll try and keep them to be about 15-minute sessions. The first one is a need for business continuity management. I believe all of you are today kind of acutely aware of what COVID's done to the entire business world. Supply chains have been disrupted. Production facilities have been obviously sort of disrupted for want of labor and workforce in the way people would have liked it. People are struggling to figure out what's the right way to get back to work. So COVID's clearly sort of, and I therefore want to spend some time on that. The second aspect is, as the world's evolving more and more into the digital space, one of the things that's obviously happening is forever increasing volume of data. And therefore, the second topic I would cover is adopting analytics in risk management. Because if you have so much of data, how do you analyze it meaningfully? Because a significant amount of difference between an organization which takes good decisions, smart decisions, fast decisions, and those that kind of hesitate in taking the same kind of business scenario decisions are those that don't analyze data that well. The third one, I think, again, extremely topical. If anything, the last 12 to 18 months has just hastened up the speed of digitalization of businesses. I'm not trying to suggest that the pace would have been dramatically different if COVID hadn't happened, because I think many companies were already embarking on that journey. But I think just the belief factor has gone up because people have seen how things can happen a lot more digitally without being there in person. So what's that? What's the impact of that on risk portfolio of companies? And the last one, which I think is, I don't get in the debate of whether people misuse their spends on sustainability, whether companies have pretended to be green when they're not green. I know there is some amount of debate right now going around as I do this session. But I truly believe that there is huge value and merit in actually embedding sustainability in business per se, but even more importantly, embedding sustainability in sourcing function, I think, is rather important. And we'll talk about the how part of it when we get to that session, because I think the world needs corporates to be more focused on sustainability. And therefore, as you think of ecosystem sustainability, I think the sourcing of procurement function actually is a large role to play. So with that, I want to sort of switch on to the first one, which really is a need for business continuity management. So as most of you would possibly know, but just for ease of reference, a business continuity plan or a business continuity management document is really about providing the necessary guidance and information and for an organization to respond to certain disruptions that they possibly haven't even sort of thought about. Yes, more often than not, business continuity plans are good to deal with a tsunami, a hurricane, or flash floods or whatever. But a good business continuity document should actually think a little beyond that. Again, I'm not going to be over sort of ambitious in trying to suggest that companies, if they had great BCP documents, they wouldn't have challenges during and post the period of COVID. I think that's just being kind of facetious about things. But yes, companies who've had better business continuity thought through, I think dealt with it a little faster and better and came out of it faster for sure. Uh, so I don't sort of, it's not binary. It's not as if you have one, then nothing impacts you. If you don't have one, you disappear. It's not so binary, but the quality of business continuity planning that you've done definitely determines how well organization deals with threats. uh, what does it really involve? You've got a bunch of things sort of listed out there. People very often confuse business continuity with data. Data, that's DRP, that's disaster recovery plan. That's more on data related focus. But business continuity is really about the entire business. So it's about knowing, firstly, what are the kind of threats that you kind of protecting yourself from. What are those primary tasks that have to happen for business to continue in a BAU manner, business as usual manner? Uh, who all need to do what? And then therefore there needs to be instructions for everyone in the organization to know exactly who to connect with, who to reach out to forward, where will data sit. All of that's got to be well known, well rehearsed, and therefore it's almost like a fire drill. Like all of you must have experienced fire evacuation mock drills in an organization. A good company would definitely ideally conduct BCP mock drills. You can't do BCP mock drill assuming that you can mock up a situation, but you do stress test it to see does everyone know what to do or not. There are different ways of doing that. Why is it really required? Firstly, it actually does give you a competitive advantage, because if you are better prepared to deal with a certain disaster, as I said, a hurricane or a tsunami or a flash flood, better than others, the better than you compete, it's distinctly a competitive advantage. It provides your organization with far more resilience to kind of not get knocked by that and then have to kind of build yourself up all over again, but to be able to continue through those kind of phases, through those through events, I would say, continue through those kind of events as if nothing, almost as if nothing happened. You got to protect yourself from a legal and financial exposure perspective, because if you go through a disruption, what are the financial exposures? Will you have a production shutdown? Will you have your distribution and logistics part of it, is that disrupted? So what does that mean? Does it mean financial losses? Could you have legal implications of it in terms of not being able to deliver to certain contractual commitments? So it's important that all those perspectives are thought through and all those risk lenses of legal and finance risk lenses applied to prepare one's business continuity plan, and because that's why it's required. It's about also internal processes. It sort of ensures that internally it improves your capability to remain as efficient and effective even through disruptions. So it's about also addressing certain amount of operational vulnerabilities, because that these kind of times of disruption do stretch your operational vulnerability. So are you prepared to solve for it? And lastly, it's also important to bear in mind who are the other interested parties, right? So everyone in the organization is an interested party. It's not just about it's not, you can't think sales has to solve for it. It could be sales, it's sales, it's production, it's customer servicing, it's procurement, it's your suppliers. Everyone could get impacted. So there are multiple interested parties that get impacted when a catastrophic event happens, or any event happens that disrupts your business beyond usual disruption. And then you're trying to come out of it through your business continuity plan. It definitely is about protecting life and property as well as environment. You don't want a situation where there is any harm to any of your organizational team members or employees, as people would call them. You actually want to protect as many as you can in the ecosystem itself. So that's really why it's so important. If you think further, it actually is kind of in some ways key to survival, because if you haven't thought through some of it, it is possible that certain types of disasters can actually almost take you out of business. As I said earlier, it definitely gives you a market edge because you're faster than your competitors. You having a good BCP actually also gives greater confidence to your customers that they are placing an order or they're doing business with a business partner who is prepared to deal through those kind of exigencies. So a strong BCP actually gives you a significant sort of marketing edge because you are seen as being a more resilient, reliable business partner for your customers. Uh, Sometimes as you go through the BCP process, it also reveals certain amount of inefficiencies. You know, because what you do is you're listing out all the critical processes because every critical process has to continue through that phase of disruption. In the process, you actually figure out there are a bunch of non-critical activities that companies do, which kind of can be shaved off. So in some ways, it can actually make the process more lean, as we call it. So you can actually use a good BCP document sort of process, business continuity plan document preparation process, as a way to actually drive out some of the waste in the processes, waste in the system, and make your business process a lot more lean. Uh, Organizations these days are actually requiring even vendors to be compliant with BCP because end of the day, your business is as good as your suppliers' ability to sort of support you, right? So therefore, that's the other perspective to bear in mind as you think of a robust business continuity plan or business continuity management overall. You actually, if you can demonstrate how robust your business continuity is, it should actually even help you with your insurance premium because if think of it, if you were an insurance company trying to provide a BCP or a disaster insurance cover to a company who is completely sort of in its early nascent stages of BCP, you would be, gosh, if that event happens, then I think we're going to the company's going to incur a lot of damages, and we'll end up having to sort of insure them for a pretty significant amount of damage. And therefore, you will charge a pretty hefty premium or compute a pretty hefty premium. Whereas if you said, this company, even if a tsunami came through, from a business continuity perspective, they won't get impacted. If it's property damage, that's different. But at least from BCP perspective, these guys are totally sorted. So that's the other impact or the reason why a good business continuity management focus is critical. Some of this might be obvious, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. How has COVID-19 really redefined the way one had traditionally perceived BCP to be? One is everyone said, you would have alternative sort of people somewhere else do the work. So if you had a team in Gurgaon, you would say, okay, fine, I've got another unit in Chennai, they could sort of cover it. You've got a unit in Bangalore, you would say, okay, I could possibly go to Pune. COVID-19 told us that it can certainly happen that you don't have people, none of the people can access your office, right? So the fundamental assumption of alternate employee availability got challenged through a disaster process like COVID-19. Could this be thought through? The answer is yes. In outsourcing environments, these kind of things are thought about. You think through how do you deal with language. There are certain esoteric languages where it's tough, but otherwise you actually even try and create some amount of language kind of redundancy as well, and ensure that you are prepared even to that extent to deal with operations from a different location. So COVID obviously challenged it because you suddenly overnight had most parts of the world not being able to get to workplace. All stakeholders impacted at the same time. Usually it hasn't been that pervasive as a COVID-19 and its peak was, and we get that. Locational backups that you would have, or one would call them mirror locations, mirror operations, so that if you have a problem in let's say your India operations, you could say, okay, fine, I could sort of replicate this out of a Kuala Lumpur, or I could replicate it out of a Hong Kong or whatever, or out of somewhere in Bangladesh or Vietnam. But given that this was a cross-boundary impact, that failed as well, because yes, I do accept that things happen in a bit of waves. So it's not that the entire world went down the same day, but for a large part of the period, most part of the world was basically locked in. So therefore, that cross-border or cross-boundary impact is something which sort of COVID taught people how to look at BCP differently going forward than pre-COVID. Uh, it normally BCP never assumed that you would have complete demand and supply disruption on an almost overnight basis. It was assumed that you would have one side of it impacted, and it wouldn't be so pervasive and so global. So that's the other thing that COVID-19 really taught us. And the last part was, it taught the need to, do everything remote. I don't think that is something which BCP had, the more traditional BCPs had been thinking about. So remote operations, no matter where, what business, what segment, is an absolute sort of novelty that new age BCP is required to sort of get their head and arms around, or more importantly, get their heads around, because this is a very, very unique form of disruption that COVID has brought up. The good news is that the principles of BCP don't have to be thought through differently. I think the principles of BCP that we just spoke about some time back, where you come up with your critical activities, you call out who needs to do what, those don't need to change. But yes, I think clearly COVID's asked people to sort of do it differently. This is a real quick snapshot of key aspects to handle. So first and foremost is who to call and when. So an event happens, who all need to be contacted, and therefore their sort of phone contacts, their email contacts, everything. What do they have to be communicated? So what's the role, who plays what roles and responsibilities through that period of crisis? So who takes on, responsibility of connecting with employees, who takes on employees of role of connecting with all suppliers, all your customers, if your bankers need to be connected with, who's sort of going to ensure that the whole production process, if any, has to be mirrored somewhere else, has to be passed on. So there are a series of activities to be done. So clarity on roles and responsibilities. First steps to take when crisis hits, that's a very important one, which is, let's say we know that there's a hurricane that's likely to hit, an unplanned hurricane that's likely to hit day after. What's the very first set of steps to be taken? How do I ensure that all my employees are safe? How do I ensure that all my suppliers have been communicated and sort of they're safe? So complete granularity of roles and responsibilities, documentation of first steps, clarity on that. Is there any regulatory requirement? Are there any authorities that need to be sort of quickly informed in case there is a data breach or whatever? So you're really prepared for that. Do you have all your procedures in place, which will determine the precise scope? How do I minimize the risk and therefore ensure that I'm, best prepared to deal with that? So do you have granular sort of operating procedures written down? How do you communicate to all possible stakeholders, all your team members across the globe, or to your sort of external stakeholders, suppliers, customers, all of them? How do you keep your employee morale going? So if something really disastrous happens, you don't want your sort of entire team to feel like, gosh, how is this business going to survive? How will you come out of it? So how do you plan for all of the communication, either pre-event, if it's an event that you can see coming in a day or two, or when the event happens, and right through your phase of recovery out of that event? It's very important that those communications are pre-planned. You don't have the time to then sit and do all of that planning, all of what to send, who to send to, who's going to review this, who's going to approve this, is this right, can I write, should I communicate this, should I say this, how will people interpret? Right at that stage, it's a complete chaos, and it's an environment of stress. So those are pre-prepared comms or communications that should be there. How do I deal with public relations? Is there a media aspect to my sort of being hit by that disruption? So if I'm a telecom operator and suddenly someone says, oh, X sort of network is down because of this event. Now, how do you solve for it? And how do you ensure that you have the right media sort of connects and public relations to say that they're going to be up in X number of hours. They're not the only ones impacted. It's not as if their network had a problem. I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying telecom's the only industry. There are a gazillion other industries that actually do need to care for their sort of social and public media, sorry, their public image. So therefore, public relations becomes important. And how do you activate outside resources and support? It's not just about you, because as you as an organization, it's about how do organizations rally all possible support. And that support can sometimes actually come from outside the organization. Right. So if it's about, rehabilitation, or if about, reconstructing a certain part of a factory or whatever it be, you can seek external support. You can seek monetary external support. You can actually sort of seek resources, because these are times when people will be willing to help you, because everyone recognizes this is a little bit of an abnormal situation to deal with. So these are just some of the key aspects that you have to handle in a BCP situation. This slide, again, I'm not going to spend too much time with. I think I've touched upon these, but I think these to me are the 9 essential questions that you should address as part of business continuity management, or as companies build plans. Which activities are critical? Fundamentally, which of those activities, if they don't happen, you will have business impact beyond scale and proportion that you're okay to deal with. What's the maximum outage tolerance? How long can you afford to be out of business? So it's like, to give a very simple example, I don't think WhatsApp these days has a choice of being out of service for more than 2 minutes. It suddenly becomes a news. Or WhatsApp, Facebook comes down, so it becomes a huge sort of news item. So that's their tolerance, right? But if I'm running bank ATMs, bank ATMs sometimes don't work for days and weeks together at a particular location. It doesn't help customer experience, but it's not as if their business is dramatically impacted. People will go find an alternative ATM. So there could be an event because of which, lights go off in an entire region and you don't have ATMs working. You can go to the next region and take money. So your tolerance is different. So your maximum outage tolerance definition is very critical. It's about what happens if data is lost. I can tell you that, I've had situations or experiences where very large global fortune companies, suddenly they've not figured out what happened. They've just got data missing for 3 months. I'm not going to get into how, what, all of it, but yeah, you need to know what happens if data is lost because of a certain incident. What records are absolutely vital? Who hasn't heard of that instance where a bank had no clue of what the customers or their balances were of all those who had money lying of theirs with the bank. So the bank basically had to go and say, okay, come to me with your last bank statement and we'll recognize or honor that as your bank balance. And imagine what happened. If you're smart enough, you'll go with a bank statement which said, you had 1 crore, while you know that just 7 days back, you'd possibly taken out 90 lakhs out of it and you were left with 10 lakhs. But if you went back to the statement, which was a week or 2 weeks back when you had 1 crore, the bank said, I'll acknowledge it. So you recognize how vital that record is for the bank, and therefore you just can't let a disaster event result in you losing that data. Who should employees contact and how? We've spoken about that. What's your data backup plan? Again, we touched upon that a little bit. What if our vendors don't have a BCP plan? As I said, we all, companies, all of you run businesses, are in organizations where you know that you can do your own BCP. But I think one of the biggest things that, again, COVID's kind of highlighted it further, but it was known for the longest time, is that no corporation sort of exists by themselves. You are as good as your entire supply chain is, and which therefore obviously includes all of your suppliers. So if your suppliers don't have a great BCP, you have a problem. If some significant customers don't have a strong BCP and they start going out of business, you got to look for new customers. And the last one is, what if you lose access to existing servers and systems? It can happen. So how long can you be out of that access? How do you sort of resurrect it? So you got to plan for all of that. And then other external dependencies, which is if your business is such that you are dependent on obviously a data provider for your data to flow through globally, right? You are reliant on a telecom provider. So those are external dependencies. So if something happens, it's not just you having your BCP in place. You got to figure out whether you have an alternative data pipe. So tomorrow, if BSNL is the source that you have for moving data across different countries in a BAU situation, if something happens, do you have a BCP which says if that data, if that whole pipe or if that whole sort of network went down, do you have an alternative with what amount of capacity to immediately take on the data flow the very next minute? So those are some of your external dependencies. So I want to just go back. So with that, I'm going to sort of wind up this session, which was on business continuity management. I just want to sort of call out that many are starting to believe that this is now critical because COVID happened. But if you want to sort of sit back, reflect on it, you'd realize that this is not COVID driven. This is way beyond COVID. And therefore, I would strongly urge that all of you sit back, reflect, how is this possibly happening in organizations that you're involved in, either as, in your own capacity, can you influence this? Should you be asking some smart questions at management meetings? And hopefully this kind of gives you some amount of flavor of how this works. I'm going to take a just quick pause and start with the next session.